There is a strange scene about halfway through Hermann Hesse's The Glass Bead Game, where the highest status people in society are basically professional pattern matchers. They sit in a cloistered academy and move symbols around. They combine music with math, philosophy with astronomy, history with geometry. The whole point is not to build a bridge or heal a patient, but to prove you can see the hidden structure beneath the world. And I've been thinking about that this week because for decades, that is what the best jobs in banking look like. Not literally a monastery, though the lighting in some midtown conference rooms is close, but a culture where being good at work meant being good at the symbolic game. You take markets, people, risk, regulation, 1,000 little constraints, and you make them cohere. You do knowledge work, which is just a polite phrase for moving abstractions around until money shows up on the other side. Now imagine that the symbol mover is not a newly hired analyst in an ill-fitting suit. Imagine it is a system that never sleeps, never misses a comma, never forgets a precedent, and never needs to learn by doing because it's been fed an ocean of other people's doing. That is the vibe of the week of December 6th through December 12th, 2025. It was a week where the conversation about AI and jobs stopped being a debate about the far future and became a debate about staffing plans. A week where executives didn't just say productivity in the abstract, they started attaching it to headcount, to entry-level hiring, to what gets cut, and to what, quietly, never gets hired in the first place. And once you see that, you start spotting it everywhere. In bank boardrooms, in a new executive order about AI in hiring, in the way retailers think about seasonal workers, the most disposable labor category we have, and how fast AI can make even that category feel optional. This is not a week of one story. It's a week of a pattern. Welcome to AI Replaced Me. I'm Koby Ofek, author of Keep Your Day Job, How to AI Proof Your Career. This is episode 31, and today is December 13th, 2025. Let's start with the place where corporate language is at its purest. Banking. Because if you ever want to know what the economy really thinks, do not read the motivational posters. Listen to how bankers talk when they're around other bankers. The banker version of honesty is not emotional, it's arithmetic. This week, at a Goldman Sachs Financial Services Conference, leaders from JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, PNC, Citigroup, and others did something you don't often see in a public setting. They described AI as a productivity tool, and then they described what happens next. They didn't say, don't worry, we'll reskill everyone. They said, in various polite ways, we can run this place with fewer people. JP Morgan's Consumer and Community Banking Chief, Marianne Lake, gave the cleanest number. She said the bank has doubled productivity to 6% with AI, up from 3% without it. And then she got more specific. She talked about operations staff becoming 40 to 50% more productive. Think about what that means in the daily life of a bank. Operations is the place where a bank turns the symbolic game into reality. It's the paperwork, the routing, the checks, the compliance work, the handoffs between systems that were built in different decades by different teams, the endless small reconciliations that make money actually arrive where it's supposed to arrive. That work has always been labor heavy, and now, suddenly, the same work can be done with a radically smaller number of hands. Wells Fargo CEO Charlie Scharf pulled the lever into plain English. We're getting a lot more done, he said, and he described the opportunity to do more with less people. He also said headcount would shrink in 2026 as AI rolls out further. There is a way to say that sentence that sounds like science fiction. There's another way to say it that sounds like budgeting. Scharf said it like budgeting. And here's why this matters beyond banks. Banking is the control case for white-collar automation. It's heavily regulated, process-heavy, data-rich, and obsessed with measuring everything. It has huge back offices, tons of repetitive tasks, and a long tradition of spending on technology. When banks say, we can do more with less people, they are not fantasizing. They are telegraphing that the math has finally gone their way. The second thing that made this conference feel like a bellwether is what it implies about the entry level. Banking has always been this weird pipeline. You hire a large class of juniors, you give them repetitive work, you watch who survives, and you promote the survivors into judgment roles. It's like the world's most expensive apprenticeship program, except the apprentices are sleep-deprived and paid in brand prestige. AI attacks the pipeline at the bottom. It loves repetitive work. It loves summarizing documents. It loves generating first drafts. It loves basic coding. It loves the exact kind of stuff you used to assign to the new person because you needed them to learn how the game is played. So when bank executives talk about productivity gains, what they are really doing is telling you that the apprenticeship is being redesigned. In some places, it is being replaced. And that has consequences that don't show up on a quarterly earnings call, but will show up in 10 years when the industry asks, where did our next generation of leaders come from? There's already evidence that the entry level is wobbling. We are watching the early career market do something unsettling. It is getting harder to break into jobs that still exist. That sounds like a contradiction, but it's the new shape of the problem. It's not only that roles disappear, it's that pathways narrow. And the hard truth is that banking is not unique here. Banking is simply honest about it, because banking always has to be honest with itself. You can call it efficiency all you want, but if you can produce the same output with fewer workers, you will. Especially in an industry where cost-to-income ratios are worshipped like sacred texts. Now, banks will tell you reasonably that AI is not replacing judgment. They'll say client relationships matter. They'll say regulators require human accountability. They'll say someone has to sign off, especially when real money is at stake. All true. But none of that protects the entry level. In fact, it makes the entry level more vulnerable, because when you need fewer people, you keep the ones who can take responsibility, and you squeeze the ones who can't yet. And the most unsettling part of the story is how calm everyone sounded. There was no drama, no apocalyptic language, just a tone that said, this is the new operating reality. PNC's CEO, Bill Demchok, framed AI as an accelerant to automation, pointing out his bank's headcount hasn't grown in a decade, even as the business tripled. That sentence is a miniature version of the economic fear many people have: growth without jobs, prosperity without payroll. If you want to understand why this gets political fast, there's a simple reason. Banks are not small employers. They are thousands upon thousands of jobs, including jobs that have historically been stable and well paid. When that kind of employer starts talking about AI, the way it talks about interest rates or credit loss reserves, it changes the social mood. It makes AI feel less like a tool you might adopt, and more like a weather system you have to survive. Which brings us to story 2, where the weather system shows up in the place we all pretend is neutral: hiring. This week, an executive order signed on December 11th pushed toward federal preemption of state and local rules governing AI in hiring. The argument from the administration is familiar. A patchwork of state laws creates compliance chaos. Employers cannot innovate if they have to satisfy 100 different rulebooks. A unified national framework is better for business, and in theory, for clarity. But if you work in the real world, you know that unified framework often means the strictest local rules get overwritten. And in hiring, strict local rules were starting to matter. For the last couple of years, we've watched a slow, messy expansion of requirements around AI screening tools. Some rules focused on audit requirements. Some demanded notice to candidates. Some demanded, explicitly or implicitly, that a human review certain consequential decisions. The details differed, but the direction was consistent. When an algorithm touches a life-changing decision, the company needs to explain itself. Now, the executive order is trying to yank the steering wheel back to the center. This is not just a policy fight. It's a story about what kind of labor market we want. Because AI in hiring is a special category of workplace technology. It is not a tool that makes the job easier after you get hired. It is a tool that decides whether you get a job at all. It is a gatekeeper. And gatekeepers are where fairness debates become real. There's a fantasy that AI makes hiring more fair because it removes human bias. That's a comforting story, especially if you have ever had to explain to your team why a hiring manager keeps not clicking with certain candidates. But the better way to think about it is this. AI doesn't remove bias. It moves bias into a different shape. It takes human judgments, historical patterns, and messy data, and it turns them into a system that can scale. It can also turn your assumptions into policy, quietly and at speed. One of the most useful research nuggets I saw recently came from a big analysis showing that job seekers using AI to write cover letters and resumes can inherit bias from the AI itself. In other words, even the candidate side can end up mirroring the model's preferences. That's a weird loop. The company uses AI to screen, candidates use AI to apply, and the AI systems start optimizing for each other. Hiring becomes a machine conversation, with humans trying to slip their stories through it like notes under a door. This is why fairness expectations are tightening. Not because we suddenly became morally enlightened, but because the mechanics of hiring are becoming more automated. And automation changes what we even mean by a fair process. Now layer on federal preemption, and the stakes become sharper. If state and local rules are preempted, you could see less friction for companies deploying AI screeners. That might increase adoption. It might also reduce transparency, and when transparency is reduced, trust doesn't just erode, it relocates. Candidates adapt. They learn which keywords work, they pay for resume optimization, they choose alternative paths like freelancing or moving into trades because they don't want to play the black box game. Employers adapt too. They outsource screening. They buy tools from vendors that promise compliance. They claim neutrality. And the labor market, as a system, becomes less legible. There's also a deep organizational incentive at play here. AI hiring tools are not just about efficiency, they are about risk management. If you can say, the system recommended this shortlist, you can shift accountability away from a human manager. You can treat hiring as a process, rather than a judgment call. That's attractive in a world where every hiring decision can become a lawsuit, a public relations crisis, or an internal culture war. Federal preemption, from that angle, is not only a deregulation move, it is a move to standardize liability, to decide at the national level what counts as due diligence when AI touches hiring. Now here's the irony. At the exact moment the executive order aims to smooth the path for AI in hiring, the business world is also admitting that the org chart itself is changing. Microsoft's 2025 Work Trend Index is one of those reports that executives cite in slides and then forget. But this year's theme was hard to ignore. It argues we are moving toward frontier firms. organizations built around human agent teams, where every employee becomes an agent boss managing AI tools, and where companies move from org charts to work charts that map tasks rather than titles. If you squint, this sounds like corporate poetry. But if you take it seriously, it's a blueprint for why preemption matters. Because if companies really start building human agent teams, then hiring becomes less about filling stable roles and more about assembling task capacity. The job description becomes less marketing manager and more someone who can orchestrate a set of tools and ship output. The interview becomes less about what you know and more about how you supervise your digital workforce. In that world, fairness is not just about who gets hired. It's about who gets to learn the new meta skill, managing AI as a collaborator. If AI becomes the digital workforce, then people who already have access to AI tools, training, and confidence will have a compounding advantage. So, story 2 is not only a regulatory shift, it is a narrative shift. We are watching hiring become the front line of the AI labor market, and policies trying to decide whether that front line will be locally governed with lots of friction and oversight, or federally standardized with fewer speed bumps. Now, story 3 is where the week got loud. Because while bankers were calmly talking about headcount and policymakers were rewriting the rules of AI hiring, a different set of voices started using a different vocabulary entirely. A vocabulary of unemployment, crisis, and social rupture. Geoffrey Hinton, often called the godfather of AI, spoke at an event in Washington hosted with Senator Bernie Sanders and warned that massive unemployment caused by AI seems very likely. Hinton is not a politician, he's a researcher. He's also, importantly, someone who helped build the underlying ideas that made modern AI possible. When a person like that starts talking like a labor organizer, you should pay attention. Because Hinton's warning is not the usual technology will change work line. It's a claim about scale and speed. The idea that this could happen faster than our institutions can adapt. And then you have Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, going on 60 Minutes and warning that AI could wipe out half of entry-level white-collar jobs and potentially drive US unemployment into the 10 to 20% range within 1 to 5 years. That is a very specific kind of rhetoric. It sounds like someone describing a hurricane they can already see on radar. Here's why these warnings hit differently now. It's not because people were unaware that automation could displace jobs. It's because the warnings are arriving at the exact moment we have concrete operational examples. When Wells Fargo says, do more with less people, you can dismiss it as finance talk. When a leading AI scientist says, massive unemployment seems likely, you can dismiss it as doom talk. But when the two show up in the same week, the same month, the same news cycle, you start to see a feedback loop. Corporate reality feeds political fear. Political fear feeds calls for regulation. Regulation feeds corporate lobbying. And the labor market is the thing in the middle getting tugged around. This week, we also saw a more constructive version of the debate emerge, and it came from a place I always trust more than pure panic. Labor economics. Stephen Greenhouse, writing in The Guardian, leaned into the question everyone is trying to avoid. Not whether AI is powerful, but whether the benefits are going to be distributed in a way that prevents a permanent class of surplus workers. He draws on MIT economist Darren Acemoglu, who has been arguing that there are two routes for AI, an anti-worker route, where AI is built to maximize automation and job reduction, and a pro-worker route, where AI is built to augment human capability, raise worker productivity, and make employees more valuable rather than more expendable. This is the part of the week that I found most important. because it restores agency. It takes us out of the passive voice. If AI is a weather system, then we just build shelters. But if AI is a design choice, then we can argue about the design. We can fight about incentives. We can redirect research. We can demand different products. We can create different procurement policies. We can, in short, choose ingredients. Now, I'm not naive about this. A pro-worker route is not the natural outcome of private incentives. The easiest way to profit from AI is to reduce labor costs. That's what Wall Street rewards. That's what budget committees understand. That's what shows up in earnings per share. But the pro-worker route is not fantasy. We already know what it looks like, at least in pieces. It looks like tools that reduce drudgery while increasing skill. Think of a nurse who spends less time on documentation and more time on patient care because a system helps with charting. Or a warehouse worker whose job becomes supervising robots rather than hauling boxes with higher pay and more safety. Or a customer service rep who is no longer trapped in the script reading tier 1 loop. Because AI handles the basic questions and the human handles complex cases with more authority. The anti-worker route looks different. It looks like the returns processing example from retail this week. Reverse Logic's CEO predicted that AI-driven returns processing could replace 20 to 30% of seasonal workers as soon as next year. Seasonal workers are the canary in the labor market because they are hired precisely for surge labor. If AI can absorb the surge, then the most temporary work becomes the most automatable work. The gig becomes the first casualty. And I want to pause on that retail story because it's easy to treat it as a side note, a cute holiday angle. It isn't. It's a micro model of how displacement can happen quietly. Seasonal work is how a lot of people patch a life together. Students, older workers, people who lost a job and need income fast, parents who can't commit to full-time schedules, people who are not in the glamorous part of the economy but still need to keep the lights on. When you replace a chunk of that work, you don't just remove wages. You remove a coping mechanism. You also change the training economy. Seasonal retail work has historically been a low barrier entry point to employment. If that shrinks, you shrink one of the few remaining easy doors into the labor market. This is how you get a new underclass, not through a dramatic one-time event, but through the slow removal of on-ramps. And here's the twist. While all of this sounds grim, the labor market data this week also delivered a reality check that I think we need if we want to stay sane. Manpower Group's Q1 2026 snapshot suggests that among employers planning to cut headcount, only about 1 in 5 cite automation and AI as the reason. Most cite economic conditions, market demand, and the kind of macro factors that have always driven hiring. In other words, AI is accelerating, but it is not yet the only story. That matters because it tells us how this might unfold. The near term will be messy. We will see AI adoption layered on top of ordinary economic cycles. Some layoffs will be blamed on AI when they are really about demand. Some AI-driven cuts will be hidden under the word restructuring. Some hiring freezes will be described as discipline. And workers will have to interpret corporate language like it's a spy code, which brings us back to the missing first rung. Because the thing that ties these stories together is not only job loss, it's the erosion of pathways. Banks cutting back on junior hiring because AI can do junior tasks. Hiring systems becoming more automated and less transparent. Seasonal work shrinking because AI absorbs peak demand. Organizations redesigning around human agent teams, which rewards people who can orchestrate tools and penalizes people who are still learning. This is not the end of work. It's a reshuffling of who gets to work and how they get there. So, what do we do with that? Here's my take. If you're an individual worker, you have to stop thinking about AI as a single skill and start thinking about it as a new layer of the workplace, like electricity. Electricity didn't eliminate factories. It changed factory design. It changed the flow of work. It eliminated certain jobs, created others, and made the most valuable workers the ones who could adapt to the new flow. AI is doing that now, but faster, and with more impact on symbolic work, the very work we once assumed was safest. So you need a strategy that fits the actual pattern. You need to know your task DNA, meaning which parts of your work are routine, which parts are judgment, and which parts are social or physical in ways that are hard to automate. You need to build a skill barbell, meaning you pair a deep human advantage, like taste, leadership, negotiation, care, with a strong ability to use tools. And you need portfolio paycheck thinking, meaning you reduce your dependence on a single employer's ladder, especially if that ladder is losing its first rung. If you're a leader, especially a leader who is tempted to celebrate AI productivity, you need to remember something simple. A company that cuts entry-level hiring is not only saving money, it is eating its future. It is consuming the part of the organization that creates culture, learning, and renewal. The best leaders I know are not the ones who say, we'll never cut jobs. They are the ones who say, if we use AI to get more output, we owe our people a plan for what they become next. And if you're a policymaker, you have to grapple with the real conflict behind federal preemption. Is the goal to maximize adoption speed or to maximize trust? Because trust is not a PR problem, it's an economic input. When workers don't trust the hiring system, they disengage, they opt out. They stop training for jobs they think they can't access. They stop believing effort pays off. And when that happens, the economy doesn't just get angry, it gets less productive. Before we wrap, it's time for our segment of quick hits that are not the main stories, but that tell you where the next wave might come from. And yes, you know them as our Future Forward Flashes segment. Let's roll. First up, the retail seasonal hiring story is not only about returns, it's about surge labor. Watch for similar AI substitution in tax season accounting support, in customer support surges after product launches, and in travel disruptions. Wherever work spikes predictably, AI will be pitched as the smoother. Next, second flash. The frontier firm idea has a hidden implication. If every employee is an agent boss, then managerial skill starts earlier. You don't need direct reports to manage. You need tools. That could create a weird new credential arms race where the first rung on the ladder becomes prove you can manage a set of agents rather than prove you can do the grunt work. Moving on right away to our third flash, the executive order on AI hiring might reduce compliance friction in the short term, but it may also increase litigation in the long term. When rules get looser, trust gets lower. When trust gets lower, disputes get louder. Watch for an uptick in cases where candidates demand explanations of automated screening outcomes. Last but not least, fourth flash for this show, the labor market data suggests macroeconomics still dominates near-term hiring. That means AI disruption will often arrive disguised as ordinary tightening. In practice, you should treat every hiring freeze as a possible AI adoption event, and every restructuring as a potential signal that task automation has crossed the threshold. Now for the ending, and I want to go back to that museum gallery at the beginning. The bored guard, the polished floor, the quiet symbols. The glass bead game was Hesse's fantasy of a society that worships abstract pattern making. Our world built a real version of that fantasy inside banks, consultancies, and corporate headquarters. We paid people very well to move symbols around, and we told ourselves that was the modern economy. This week felt like the moment the symbols started moving themselves. The question is not whether AI can do the symbolic game. It can. The question is what we do about the ladders that used to teach humans how to play it. The question is whether we build workplaces where people become more capable, or workplaces where people become more optional. If you want a simple mental model, here it is. Every time you hear a leader brag about AI productivity, ask, where did the saved labor go? Did it go into fewer people or into better people? Did it go into shareholder returns or into training, new roles, new pathways? Because if the answer is fewer people and nothing else, then you're not watching progress. You're watching a narrowing. And if you're a worker, the best move is to widen your own options before the door narrows further. That's the whole point of my book, Keep Your Day Job. How to AI-proof your career. It's available on Amazon and wherever you get books. It's a map for living in this messy, shifting world, where the job you trained for might still exist, but the ladder into it might not. I'm Koby Ofek, and this was AI Replaced Me. See you guys next week.